Welcome back. Here is another topic when it comes to network security, which is wireless security. Nowadays, almost all the networks have an access point, and every time we turn on our Wi-Fi on our phones, we will see a bunch of access points just ready for us to connect to them. This makes them one of the biggest targets when it comes to hacking. First of all, not all access points are the same. We can separate them by different type of security that they have, starting from WEP or WEP, then VPA, VPA2, and VPA3. Now, WEP was the first wireless security protocol that has been widely used. Today, WEP has a bunch of threats, and it is highly unlikely that you will ever come across an access point that still uses WEP. Nowadays, most common ones are WPA and WPA2. WPA was adopted as an alternative to WEP since WEP had a bunch of issues. WPA uses 256-bit encryption technology, and it first introduced WPA Personal for home wireless access points and WPA Enterprise for larger companies. The version 2 or WPA2 came with a little improvement when it added the Advanced Encryption Standard, also known as AES, which provides higher security and performance, but even WPA2 had some security issues. In 2018, WPA3 was introduced with some improvements in the protection against dictionary types of the attacks, which were common with WPA2. Another thing is, even in home networks, WPA3 will automatically encrypt the connection without any need for credentials which could be stolen. And out of all of them, even though WPA3 is rather new and it will take time for it to get its space in the industry, it is recommended to use it whenever you can. As far as the attacks and prevention against these attacks go, here are the two most common ones. The first one is called Evil Twin Attack. In normal use of an access point, a device will connect to an SSID that it wants to join, and after the credentials have been exchanged, the access point will grant access to that device to join the network. Now, what an attacker does in this case is create his own fake access point with the same SSID and make sure he either has the stronger signal than the original access point or he comes closer to the target. This is because a device will automatically connect to the stronger access point that he sees with the same SSID in case the auto-connect option is on, which is the case for most of the devices. This will result into target connecting straight to the attacker's access point without the user of that device even noticing, which is once again the result of the access point having the same SSID, which is also the name of the access point, and it having the stronger signal than the original access point. Once the target connects to the fake access point, the attacker can then send a fake captive portal requiring the user to input the access point credentials for whatever reason. A little bit of social engineering comes in play here, but not that much since the target in 99.9% of cases won't suspect anything since they will think that they connected to their own access point that just requires credentials to continue using the internet. Once they input the credentials or the password, the attacker now knows the access point's password, and from here he can just log in to the original access point on his own. Now let's mention how can we prevent against this, or how can we protect against this? Well, there are several things we can keep an eye on to minimize chances of this attack. We can always only connect to our own hotspot or our own access point which we are familiar with. You can also avoid using unsecured hotspots that have no security at all and that are open for anyone to connect. You can also disable auto-connect on your device so your device doesn't automatically try to connect to a hotspot since it can connect to the fake one if the signal is stronger. If you have auto-connect off, you will have to go to your Wi-Fi settings and pick an access point from there. This way you will notice that there are two exact same access points with the exact same name, and you will know something isn't right and that a possible evil twin attack is taking place. Also, when you can, use VPN encrypted traffic just in case. This would be the first common attack and its preventions. The second attack is a typical brute force attack. Now, this is possible since attacker can steal the hashed value of the access point's credentials and brute force it until he gets that in plain text. In more details, it works like this. Let's say we have an access point with some devices connected to it, and we have a hacker that is not connected to the Wi-Fi at the moment. The only requirement for this is that the hacker is close to the Wi-Fi during the first part of the attack. An attacker can send something called deauthentication packets without being connected to the access point, which will then automatically disconnect the already connected devices from the Wi-Fi. Now, for an attacker to perform this attack, he must have a wireless card that supports monitor mode and packet injection. Not many wireless cards support this, but it's quite cheap to get an external one that is able to perform this type of the attack. The next step is, after deauthenticating the devices on the network, these devices will then try to reconnect to the access point by performing a four-way handshake where it exchanges the key. And at this very moment, the attacker will try to steal this handshake and store inside a file for later use. In this very file, if everything is done successfully, would be the hashed value of the access point's password. Here comes the hardest part, which brings us back to password security, and that is that the attacker must now brute force the hash in order to get the plaintext password. If you followed all the steps we taught at the beginning of the course, where we covered password security and showed an example of well-secure passwords, there is no way that any hacker will be able to brute force it. But if your password is weak, the attacker will get it in plain text in a matter of seconds. Keep in mind that these offline brute force attacks can cover millions, even hundreds of millions of passwords every single second, which you can imagine is quite a lot of combinations. If your password is weak or semi-weak, the attacker will eventually get it, and once he does, he can use that plaintext password to connect to the wireless access point on his own. Okay, now here are some of the preventions and how we can secure ourselves from this type of the attack. First thing, as usual, we want to change the default password if it is set. Sometimes vendors might come to set up the Wi-Fi and they put a default password which the user is then meant to change later but never does. This ends up being a problem since these default passwords are easily found on the internet, and if anyone wants to join the access point, they can do that with just a little bit of Googling. Another step is to make password as strong as possible and as complex. This will make it impossible to brute force and get it in the plain text. And a more advanced security measure that you can do is to create a whitelist or a blacklist based on MAC addresses. Now, these type of settings are standard and you can usually find them inside your router settings where you configure the access point, but creating these can essentially block out anyone who tries to join the network but doesn't have a valid MAC address that belongs to the list. Nonetheless, that would be about it for the wireless security. We mentioned two most common attacks on the access points, and we also mentioned what steps you can take to prevent them from happening or to make them less likely to happen. Now, in the next video, let's see a demonstration of one of these attacks and how they look like.